come in.
Versus Huang.
Here.
Akbari.
Here.
Sethy.
Here.
Weed.
Here.
And Gunther.
Here. Will Director Akbari lead us in the salute to the flag, please?
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Public comments, I see,
Well, I want to bring the mic closer, Jim.
what's that? Yeah. We'll open up the meeting then for public comments. I think you're up.
Sister Lori wants to go first.
Okay.
Wow, haven't seen her in a long time.
My name is Lori Pasquale, and I live in Union City. And President Trump passed Executive Order 13834, an efficient federal operations that was signed for President Trump to meet statutory requirements in a manner of efficiency and optimize performance and eliminates unnecessary use of resources and protect the environment. Under this order, it says, implement waste prevention and recycling measures and comply with all federal requirements with regard to solid, hazardous, and toxic waste management and disposal. This is where toilet to tap and biosludge comes into play. Some of the water is for drinking and bathing, and some goes on the crops. The biosludge also gets put on the crops too. Is this why the recent scare for the hepatitis and the blackberries back east? Palo Alto implemented toilet to tap for irrigation on the golf course. Are there records that new pipes were laid to separate the toilet to tap from the rest of the water supply? When they water the grass, won't it seep into the ground and go into the aquifers? So directly or indirectly, you're still drinking toilet to tap. What about Alameda County? How many times are we taxed to replace the infrastructure, and basically the pipes get replaced as they break? If our wastewater goes on the ground and seeps into the aquifers, we are drinking toilet to tap too. Or should I use the word percolate as the Alameda County Water District used before? Funny that I don't see any filters like you would use when you make coffee. No matter what, if it seeps into the ground, it blends. The Newark Desalination plant is also downstream from the Union City wastewater treatment facility. How much is dumped onto the ground to seep into the aquifers, and how much goes out into the San Francisco Bay for Newark to desalinate? October 2017, Governor Brown passed AB 967 to liquefy dead bodies. It goes into effect in 2020. The problem is that no consideration was taken into account for those of us that are forced to drink toilet to tap. The bodies will be boiled in a vat of water and lye and then poured down the drain. Once recycled and blended, we will be drinking it, bathing it, and it will go on our crops. It's cannibalism. I am asking that you officials to stop this before it starts. Either get AB 967 revoked or ban it in your city and don't issue any permits to liquefy dead bodies. This bill was stopped 2 times before. It's not necessary. The EPA is supposed to be monitoring smokestacks over crematories. They can use filters and scrubbers on their chimneys. Making our water more toxic is not the answer. Sweden freeze-dries dead bodies and makes them into crystals. Then they bury it under trees. We can do the same and have them buried in the forest. We don't need to have it where there's agriculture nearby. Why boil water? Why boil these dead bodies when there's concerns about water shortages? I mean, that's crazy. No consideration was given for our health. As more bodies get flushed down the drain and are recycled, what will that lye do to our bodies? Will we disintegrate too? I don't understand how a hypodermic needle can be considered medical waste and a deceased body's tissues not. Are you willing to consume a body of a person that died of hepatitis, AIDS, or mad cow disease? No consideration was given to the deteriorating infrastructure either. Over time, this 5% lye solution will have effects on our
30
sewer
seconds
lines.
left.
In addition, the pH will kill the fish in the bay. We, the people, should have the right to know to what goes in our food and water. I prefer mine without dead bodies. Please see that AB 967 to liquefy dead bodies is banned locally and in every city. Don't issue permits. Lastly, I spoke to the Union City Council and Alameda County Water District 20 years ago telling you about fluoride, that it was nothing more than poison. You knew that the material safety data
Mr.
sheet
Scull,
is
but your
poisonous
time is
and it
up.
models your teeth and bones. Thank you.
My name is Gunther, and a lot of you know me. I've been here before. And I'm here tonight to talk about AB 967. This was snuck through. What they did was in 2010 and 11, it was AB 283. We got it stopped. It came back as Assembly Bill 4. We got it stopped again. And what they did all these years later, they put this through in 2017 because they only put it in the newspaper after it was passed. It was in the San Francisco Chronicle, the Sacramento Bee, and KQED Online. That's it. Personally, I have handed out 9,000 papers on this, which you got a copy of, one of them. And my sister did more too. I mean, that's just what I did. Up and down this state, all the way from the Oregon border down to LA. I went to the Truth of Cancer seminar, and I passed them out in LA, and I went to Victorville, right? Victorville. So anyway, I've been passing these things about this AB 967, and the majority of the people are furious. And since Trump just signed this bill, which I just put on public record too, about his wastewater treatment that he wants all over in all the cities, so we're all going to drink toilet to tap. And this is sickening, because there's no reason for it. Water is a renewable source. If you look up Deborah Tavera, she has something on YouTube called Primary Water. Check it out, because the water is, our earth makes water. That's no joke. And it's not the secondary water when it comes down from the rain. And since we have our weather geoengineered, and we're having it sprayed every day to control the what they're doing, and the water and the snow right now is really toxic. They put surfactants in it that makes the snow slippery. You look at this whole world and how crazy it is. This is about depopulation. The fluoride, once you watch this movie, when they put Teflon in the DuPont thing, this dark waters, the biggest thing in the chemical was fluoride attaching to carbon, making this strong chain, and it poisoned all the water, which we all have this in us. It's not just from the Teflon pans going into the drinking water, that chemical. It's in carpeting, you name it. And what's amazing about it is that when people hear that fluoride was one of the main ingredients, which is poison, okay? I have now put on your public record again the Harvard brain damage studies on fluoridation. Paul Connett from Fluoride Action Network is suing the government in February 2003, on February 3rd, 2020, I said that wrong, next year in February, to stop fluoridation. And hopefully if people see this movie and get a connection between fluoride and then putting fluoride in our water, hopefully this is going to get stopped once and for all. And mostly I would hope everybody would support this. And the thing, too, is I think Jackie Spears needs to be impeached. She wrote a bill to fluoridate the rest of the state. And in 2005, the peninsula, there was quite a few cities that got their fluoridation because of her. And it was Redwood City, Menlo Park, San Carlos, Belmont, Sunnyvale, Milpitas, East Palo Alto, San Jose, and Santa Clara because of Jackie Spears in 2005. Well, in 2005, the arsenic levels were allowed at 50 parts per billion, and at 50 parts per billion, it killed 1 in 100 people with cancer. So she wrote a bill that claimed it was medicine to fluoridate the rest of this state when their water companies had enough money to do so. And phosphate fertilizer waste, fluorosilicic acid, has arsenic in it. Number one cause, arsenic. And guess what the biggest cause of prostate cancer is? Arsenic, which is on here. And plus I got other articles too. But, so if we're adding arsenic to the drinking water to reduce cavities and reduce the population, she should be in jail. And I would love to see Jackie Spears impeached. There's a lot of people doing this, and if she had the right to kill 1 in 100 people with cancer in 2005, 2006, they were supposed to reduce it down to 10. I didn't see nothing in the news. Did they really reduce the arsenic levels in the drinking water? What did you do to reduce the arsenic levels? How much millions did you spend to take arsenic out? I'd like to know. So here's the thing, too. They also say that arsenic in low doses causes type 2 diabetes. Now we got 5Gs putting up, and if you look up on YouTube, Dr. Sharon Goldberg, it says veteran MD drops bombshell at 5G hearings. They know that the 5Gs are going to increase diabetes because they microwave rats at 4Gs to give them diabetes to study the cure. So our water companies are adding arsenic through the fluoridation chemicals into the drinking water, and now we're going to sit there and we're going to get nuked with the microwaves from the 5Gs. This is murder. And you know something? You didn't get on this water board. You're just supplying us with water, but you didn't get on this board to reduce the population and sterilize everybody, did you? You want people to have clean, reliable water. And what kills me is that this dead body's going down the drain, cooked in lye, wasting our water on that, when we can freeze-dry dead bodies like Sweden. This will crack the sewer lines. And I went through all my news articles talking about how the sewer lines are not being replaced.
Thank you.
It's an accident waiting to happen. Please stop it.
Thank you very much.
So you all have the Harvard brain damage studies tonight, okay?
We got this stuff? Okay. Thank you. Further public comments?
Hi, my name is Indrajit Sahota, and today I'm here regarding the Help on Tap program that helps families get a discount based on certain guidelines and criteria if they meet it. So for our situation, we're retired for this employer. So when you're an active employee, what they do is for healthcare premiums and insurances and like that, they take that out before they give you the total gross income for the total end of total gross income. They take those premiums out. But if you're a retired employee, they don't do that. So that's like, for employees it's pre-tax, for retired people it's post-tax. So when you look at the total gross income, that amount is not taken out. So your total gross income is elevated if you're retired. You're also on limited, stable income, but it's that amount that they don't take out. They do it differently. It shows as your gross income has been elevated. So when you guys look into the program, and I don't know how, you guys come up with guidelines and such, I want to, if you can take this consideration, as in our situation, I don't know for other people, but in our situation, our gross is elevated because of this premium not being taken out of total gross income. So for us, it's limited income, and we're on limited income, and this discount would really help us. But because of this thing, this particular item is not looked into. So I want to bring it up to the board members. So if they are voting or deciding how to set the guidelines for this program, they look into that. And if for our situation, if the premiums we pay, health premiums are not in our gross, it is in our gross income, if that could be adjusted for our particular situation. So if you guys can bring it up to, I think Ethan Birch is the head of that program. If that could be brought up with him and you guys can discuss it and see what could be done with that, that would be a big help for us. So that's the main thing I just want to bring out. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, how they do the pre-tax, post-tax, and it's the same exact employee. If you're an employee, your income is lowered because they take the premiums out, basically. But if you're retired, it's not taken out, so your gross income is elevated, pretty much. which is the exact same income, but it's just the way they do it. So, so I just wanted to thank you for listening. That was my concern. And maybe you can change the guidelines, because in the actual guidelines, there's nothing about pre-tax, post-tax, or anything like that. So they just look at black and white, total gross income. So I would appreciate it if you could look into that when you guys do the adjustments or whatever for that. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other speakers?
Any other speakers this evening? Hearing none. To the evening's consent calendar.
Mr. President, as a suggestion, the board may consider covering item 6.3.1 for the end-of-year legislative report. Jonathan Clay is here, as well as Erin Gilbert, to make a brief presentation, and then we can get them back into the traffic on their way back to Sacramento.
I'm perfectly fine with having, I think everybody would be fine.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'll kind of lean into this a little bit, given my height. Good evening, Board President, board members. My name, again, is Jonathan Clay. Happy to be here and appreciate the opportunity to speak to you guys tonight. Knowing that you have a full agenda tonight with some big issues, we will keep this short and sweet. Introduce Erin Gilbert, my associate here, and we constitute your lobbyists in Sacramento. We've really enjoyed working for the district this past year and getting to know the district issues and engaging on your behalf. From our perspective, we think we had a successful year, both getting to learn those issues, working with staff, and conveying the district's position in that legislative body, both in the Senate and the Assembly, working with your delegation, with Assemblymember Quirk, Senator Wachowski. You know, this was a good year in the water world in terms of being able to successfully kind of navigate the issue of safe and reliable drinking supply and how to fund that on a statewide basis. At the end of the year, SB 1 made it to the governor, but the governor saw the wisdom in vetoing that piece of legislation. So there were some big issues that were addressed in a, depending on what side of the issue you're on, but in a sort of a acceptable manner. And we just, again, appreciate being able to work for the district. I think just kind of looking at our stuff here, I think I'll kick it over to Erin to take a quick look at the budget, and then I'll kind of talk about some of the politics that are going on, and then sort of what we see kind of coming over the horizon for the year ahead.
So the governor is going to be presenting his budget on January 10th, so we don't have any details at this point in time, but the LAO recently released a report recommending tempered expectations, and assuming current law and policies remain constant at the end of the 2020 to 2021 session, an estimated $7 billion is going to be in surplus. They also recommend that the legislature limit its ongoing commitments to approximately $1 billion and one-time spending of approximately $4 billion. The governor has hinted that he seemingly agrees with those approximate numbers, and so on January 10th is when we will learn more about that. There are certain risks, of course, to the budget. That includes federal decisions, major natural disasters like wildfire, and of course the potential of a recession. But the legislature currently has a rainy day fund of $18.3 billion, and so the LAO feels comfortable that if it's a moderate recession, we should be fine. Remains to be seen.
One of the interesting things, if you kind of dig into the numbers of the budget, and this is why I think the LAO has issued some caution about looking at additional expenditure revenues. So when you look at the month-to-month revenue coming into the state, personal income tax especially is down already for the first 4 months to the tune of about $622 million, below what they projected when they did the budget back in July 1st. So now that said, corporate income tax has gone up, but there's definitely softening of the revenues coming in. So, and when the governor was doing his signing and vetoing of bills, the governor made mentions when he was signing, and like, how big is the school bond? 18 billion or
15, I think.
Yeah, 15 billion. So there will be a school facilities bond that you'll be voting on, somewhere around 15 billion. The governor cautioned that he wanted a slow glide path down, and so I think we're going to see sort of tightening of the purse strings. I'll kind of jump into a little bit of some of the politics that are going on in Sacramento. Aaron will touch on a bit of this as well, but I think one of the things that continues to kind of drive an interesting dynamic is the further reduction of the minority party in Sacramento, with some notable folks switching from Republican to now declined to state or independent. And then even more interesting is Republicans taking on sitting Republicans because they feel that those existing Republicans, such as Tyler Deep down in Orange County, aren't embodying the true Republican spirit. So we're not at a sort of a single party yet within the Capitol environment, but I mean, you have upwards of 2/3 majority in both houses, which means the minority party is becoming more and more irreverent, or not irreverent, but irrelevant. And it's changing the dynamic of how you operate in that environment in terms of interfacing with legislators, how you go about trying to either support or oppose bills. So.
In the Assembly we have 80 members, and we lost 2 Republicans, so we're down to 18 as of last week. So just how you lobby 18 Republicans versus the majority of the Democrats, it's causing a different dynamic. And we all are also seeing that in the Senate with Senator Steve Glazer. He now has a Democratic challenger, and also Scott Wiener has a Democratic challenger. And so that's something we haven't really seen before, where we're seeing more conservative and more liberal coming in from the outside.
In terms of the year ahead, I think this is going to be an interesting dynamic this year because it's the earliest in a number of years that we've had primaries. So March primaries this cycle, typically it had been in June. So much of the focus of the legislature when they come back will be kind of split between dealing with PG&E and then immediately taking off to go back to their districts to campaign for their respective races. And just kind of anecdotally, election years are not years that you see a lot of, breaking ground or kind of big pieces of legislation that come forward, though the PG&E wildfire kind of fire interface, I think, will take up a lot of oxygen in the room. And I think from any type of utility, we'll need to want to watch this because, with recent articles continuing to come out saying that PG&E has not expended all the money that they should have for underground utilities, I think you'll have the legislators wanting to lift up the hood, so to speak, and have more oversight over, in general, not maybe just electrical utilities, but maybe utilities in general in terms of how maintenance is done, how they move forward with their planning for infrastructure upgrades, etc. This isn't specific to the district, but there was legislation that was passed and signed, AB 5, related to what qualifies as an employee versus a sort of, I'll call it the gig economy. And we will see that come right back to the forefront again this year with continued fixes because, of course, there's always the law of unintended consequences, and they didn't quite get everything right the last time, and so there will be further discussions about more exemptions within that law for different categories of employees. And then, of course, the last 2 things I'll just bring up, and then I think we'll end there for questions. The ever just sort of reoccurring every year discussions around homelessness and housing, how to kind of bridge those problems, what that looks like. Again, from the district's perspective, I don't know if that's necessarily something that impacts you directly, but it will be at the forefront of the legislature as they continue to try and grapple with the problem. A lot of that will be more, I would call it, sort of fighting between counties and cities over funding and who actually has control of these programs. And then finally, there continue to be many discussions going on in the Capitol around resiliency bonds, sort of climate adaptation funding. Again, I'm not so sure how far that gets in the process, given the governor's comments on a slow glide path. But, you know, in rough terms, a $10 billion bond is going to basically cost close to $1 billion in general fund costs on an annual basis. So if you pass the $10 billion bond, you'll need to carve out, I think it's more like around $800 million for debt service once that bond's fully issued out. So if we're entering a tighter economy, you know, back in 2010 we saw public employee unions of actually opposing at that time the water bond because of the costs to the state's general fund, which typically would come out of programs that they would want to support. So that said, there's also the same folks that are backing some of the bonds in the legislature are also starting to circulate their own initiatives. So we'll see how that all develops. I think with that, we are done.
Any questions?
I have some questions if I can lead off. Okay. First of all, Jonathan and your whole team, we appreciate all your efforts up in Sacramento. I had the chance to join Jonathan up there a couple of times and in fact had the pleasure of giving testimony at one of the assembly hearings, or joint Senate assembly hearings. So that was fun too, earlier this year. Let me ask you a couple of questions. Let me ask them separately and then you can answer both of them.
Okay.
So, first of all, what water legislation are you following right now that's important to the district in the second legislative session that's coming up? And number two, I attended the CSDA Climate Adaptation Roundtable that was in Berkeley early last month. I copied you on that. And in fact, I have a copy of it right here in front of me. And it was an absolutely excellent day. I said it was the best one-day forum I've ever attended from CSDA. And I think you agreed the panel was exceptional.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. So the one thing that came out of that meeting was Senator Skinner gave us our lunchtime presentation and said that there was a newly formed Bay Area Legislative Caucus. Mm-hmm. And that they are going to have their own off-site meeting for 2 or 3 days in early January, the first week of January. And she said that number one on their agenda is a water parks bond of $4 billion. So I'm looking for some insight on that too. So first, water legislation that you're following, and then what about this prospective $4 billion parks water bond that we're hearing about?
Got it. I'll start off with one of the bills that we followed on behalf of the district and kind of engaged with around the periphery around was Assemblymember Quirk's AB 402 related to local drinking water programs. That bill died in Senator Probst. I'm confident that that bill will come back again next year. Aqua was very engaged on trying to oppose that, and the best way to describe it, when I sat through the Senate Environmental Quality hearing, Assemblymember Quirk is usually fairly reserved in his presentations on bills. He was very animated on his advocating for this proposal, so I would guess that that will come back. The implementation of the Safe Drinking Water Program, so SB 200 by Senator Monning was the legislative companion to the budget proposal, which created the work group at the State Water Board. That work group's going to have their first meeting on, I think, January 13th or thereabouts. And part of what will need to be kind of focused on that from both the district level and broader within the water community is, as they collect the data to define the scope of the problem, what projects are being funded, how are they taking on and alleviating the problem. Because one of the arguments we'd had in this whole debate about the water tax was, okay, if you have a set problem, do you really need a water tax that's going on forever? And so it's a little different narrative because it's state budget dollars that are at stake here. It's not necessarily a call directly upon our ratepayers, but it's something to watch as that kind of gets put together, because you can very easily see this become a very large program that will go on indefinitely. So there's that. I think, again, some of the bigger issues on the water world are also going to be happening behind the scenes. Everything that's going on with WaterFix, the voluntary agreements. I don't think those are necessarily things that will be directly in the legislative environment, but there's a lot of action going on around that. In fact, there's a state water contractors advocates meeting in a week, as I think where they're going to be updating more on what's going on with the voluntary agreements and some of those other things. On the second part related to the water parks bond, I tend to think, if I had to read the kind of the tea leaves, that this may not be a year for a lot of different bond proposals. And if they do, I think a parks type bond gets rolled into what they're calling that resiliency bond. And just to give a couple examples, down in San Diego, an area that I'm very familiar with, because of the severity of storms and increased wave action, you know, whether you want to attribute that to climate change or just cycles, but you're having bluff collapses. And now the ocean has approached within 3 feet of the only north-south train rail line going through San Diego. They had a second collapse a week ago, so they have 2 problem areas. And this is just one example up and down the state. So there are desires to do that. I think the argument will be parks, open space, green space is just one of the components of a resiliency bond, and so I think that's how that will get captured. And I've heard numbers. Originally, I think it's SB 54 was they're shooting for around that $4 billion number. I'm now hearing that that may double in terms of what they're looking for. So you capture more things such as what would traditionally be a parks bond, but I don't know if you'll see a water bond to the scale that we've seen in the past, or if there are water components, it's definitely going to be tied towards some type of climate resiliency.
Senator Skinner mentioned that our state senator for our district, Bob Wykowski, was really the team leader for the Bay Area caucus on climate adaptation, climate issues, climate resiliency. So I would hope that you would interface with him to find out more about how we could benefit from a prospective bond.
Well, and I think as the district, one thing I would say is as we go into this new legislative year, I think it'll be helpful to understand the types of needs that the district might have, and then that allows us to figure out the right places to be able to plug it in or help with the crafting of that language. So I wouldn't be shy about coming up with a list of different ideas to then take to Senator Wykowski as they, because the crafting of these bonds, I've sat in the room where these have been put together and it's a messy process. And so, but making sure that your delegation, both Assemblymember Quirk and Senator Wykowski, are armed with, you know, what types of things, not necessarily specific projects, but categories of projects, I would say would always be helpful.
Senator Skinner was actually requesting, and I would say in a way pleading with the water districts that were in attendance to provide input as to what they really want to see in such a bond. So I'm hoping that all of us collectively can do that.
Definitely.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Thank you both for being here tonight. I hope it wasn't too bad to get down here.
Actually, getting here was actually fairly easy. I think the
hopefully not too
yeah,
bad.
knock on wood. The fun part will be heading back upstream.
I'll give you both of the questions, and they're on 2 very different topics. So, The first, you mentioned that there was a delta in personal income tax revenue and also corporate income tax revenue.
Better if I bring it up.
How has the state explained that delta so far, and should we be concerned that in the upcoming years we will see a further decline in personal income tax revenue, and that the state will become more reliant on corporate income tax? And then the second question, I followed AB 5 just because I thought it was a very interesting piece of legislation. You mentioned unintended consequences. Are there any considerations that we should be making on how we approach labor in general because of AB 5 and because of maybe upcoming legislation that would be building upon AB 5?
Do you want to take some of that? Okay. So to answer the first question, we don't have a good understanding yet of the whys of the dip in the personal income tax. I mean, it's not uncommon. I mean, California is very dependent on income tax for overall revenues, and so when times are good, we see huge spikes in revenues, and when times are bad, we get the huge drop, and that's why under Governor Brown, you saw the push for the rainy day fund to try and kind of cut the peaks and valleys off of those swings. We'll probably have a better sense soon after the governor releases his budget. The Senate and the Assembly will begin their budgetary hearing processes, and that's when LAO will come in, Department of Finance, and I think we'll have a better understanding then at that point of at least an explanation of what they think is driving some of these variations. But like I said, I think it was $622 million in November was how much they were off on personal income tax, and then I think corporate tax was another just over $500 million above projections. So it's interesting to note that there's still, even with these kind of variations, a $7 billion overall surplus. So, and that'll be a hard conversation in the legislature, because when you see $7 billion, the natural inclination is let's spend some of it. But as Aaron was highlighting, the Legislative Analyst's Office, LAO, is saying that they estimate that only about $1 billion of that 7 is revenue that you could count on coming in the future on a consistent basis. AB 5, so that's, I'll give you an example of a couple of the unintended consequences, and then I'll try and answer how that may eventually become an issue for the district. Unintended consequences, a really interesting one is on in the hospital world, and we have some experience there. You know, doctors under scope of practice cannot be direct employees of a hospital. They have to be a separate group, so there was an exemption created there. It gets more kind of gray when you're talking about audiologists or physical therapists and those types of groups, and they're now being covered under AB 5, and those occupational groups are saying, no, we don't want to be covered under AB 5. And so I think the legislature will revisit that, but this gives kind of context to the power of labor these days within the legislative environment. I think the groups that aren't directly hired by any hospital anywhere, aren't represented by labor, probably will be able to get an exemption. But if there are, we'll pick on audiologists, I don't know if this is true or not, but let's say most audiologists are contract-based, but there are some systems that hire them directly and they're direct employees represented by a union. I think you'll see it harder for an exclusion created for that category of worker from AB 5. Then in terms of how this could impact the district into the future, we actually go back in time about 2-3 years ago. There was a bill that would have prohibited contracting out by counties for anything. So if you're a county, you couldn't contract out for lobbying, you couldn't contract out for any of the health and human services programs you did. It had huge ramifications for a lot of the community-based organizations that get funding from a county for implementing those programs. That bill eventually failed, but I wouldn't be surprised that if that doesn't come back around again, in the broader context of, okay, we've looked at this on the gig economy side, what about local governments that, use contract workers for environmental document review, janitorial services, other types of professional services. So I think that could be back on the horizon again, and that's how I could kind of see a progressive step from where things are now with AB 5 to where they might be.
So in the next iteration of this, are there particular exemptions that you think we should be pursuing and advocating for, or at this point is it kind of like a wait and see?
Unfortunately, I think you get to sit on the sidelines and kind of watch the dust fly on all this. I'm just kind of guessing where, if I was on the labor side, where things might go. So, and given that they've tried it in the past.
As a longtime newspaper boy, a lot of that income helped pay for my college education. I feel sorry for the news carriers that have not been exempted.
Right, and there was that deal cut for the newspapers, and there's been, I'll say this, the Capitol environment's like high school on steroids for rumors, but there has been some speculation that, yes, the newspapers got a little bit of a reprieve, but is it really a reprieve, and how that's all going to pan out.
I'm rooting for newspaper boys.
Well, and the thing that's interesting is Assemblymember Gonzalez continues to come at it from the perspective of there was a court decision. We could just let the court decision stand and let it all get litigated out, or we can try and wade into it and try and have a more reasoned process.
Jonathan, I am just thinking, I in fact mentioned to you when we were up in Sacramento that being a news carrier was the best job I ever had. Gave me all the training for life.
I wish I had we don't even, I think, have a real news carrier anymore with our newspaper. It just kind of shows up, and I'm not sure who's delivering it anymore. So, anyways, hopefully those answer your questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Just a rhetorical comment. The potential chaos in the electrical utilities is something I encourage you to keep us appraised. We don't know where it's going to break up. And you've got San Francisco and San Jose each making bids. The state at one time, 20 years ago, some of these issues are coming back up to all of the easements that PG&E have potentially be transferred over to state ownership. So that, keeping us appraised of that evolving issue. As a local sidelight, our local city tried to, about 15 years ago, tried to purchase the Poe Dam. PG&E was a day late in their renewal of their application for it. Spent $250,000, and thank God they didn't get it, because the campfire started just outside the Poe Dam. And they would have been tied up in litigation for many years to come, plus the costs related to it. So, just to be aware. Thank you.
Most definitely, and something I would say water agencies should really focus on is, if there is an effort to break up PG&E, I think there will be a scramble by private investors and other groups for those PG&E hydro assets, because I think there's a lot of value both from an energy side and a water supply side.
We have limited power production in our district, some of it inline hydro. We're looking at an expansive solar program, even though the curves are inverted now. So it's the wild world of, so to whatever you can do to keep us appraised would be appreciated.
Most definitely.
No questions, but just want to say thank you. And it has been a pleasure chatting with you almost monthly at the committee meetings. And thank you for keeping us updated and bring issues to our attention when it's need be, and be so responsive to our staff requests when we have issues. So thank you.
It was our pleasure.
I concur that. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk monthly, and nice to see you down at the conference too. Thanks for what you do up there. I think, ironically, with the lack of the minority party, what you're doing up there becomes even more difficult. So, thanks much. Keep up the good fight. We appreciate your help.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's about 2 hours right now, traffic back to Sacramento. So that's not so bad.
Would you like to do the consent calendar?
We could do the consent calendar real fast. We'll move on for consent calendar.
I'll make a motion to add items 5.3 and 5.4 to the consent calendar.
Motion to move 5.
Second.
A second. Further comments? Secretary, call the roll.
Sure. Directors Huang? Aye. Akbari?
Aye.
Sethy?
Aye.
Weed?
Aye.
And Gunther.
Aye. Move the consent calendar as amended.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Okay. Directors Huang?
Aye.
Akbari?
Aye.
Sethy?
Aye.
Weed?
Aye.
And Gunther.
Aye.
Now we do 5.1.
Item 5.1. Board election of officers.
Yes, thank you, President Gunther. California Water Code, Section 30520, provides that the director shall, 1, elect one of their number president, and 2, may elect one of their number vice president. Pursuant to Section 2.2 of the Alameda County Water District Board Rules and Code of Conduct, and Resolution 1871, adopted December 10, 1970, this election is typically held at the first regular meeting in December each year, and the directors who are elected president and vice president officially assume their office roles at the close of the meeting in which they are elected, which presumably would be at the end of tonight's meeting. So the recommendation is by motion, adopt resolutions electing 1, a president, and 2, a vice president of the board. And I should point out that the board customarily rotates among its members, and if the board chooses to maintain that rotation, I would be happy to inform the board who is next in line in the customary rotation, if asked.
President Gunther,
Director Sethy?
would you welcome a nomination?
We doing vice president for president first?
President first.
Well, I would like to take the privilege on this as the president to nominate my successor as the president sitting vice president and let her suffer next year as president. So with that, I'd like to nominate Director Huang as president.
Second.
Directors Huang? Aye. Akbari?
Aye.
Sethy?
Aye.
Weed?
Aye.
And Gunther.
Aye. I appreciate you letting me do that.
Would you welcome me nominating the vice president?
I will certainly welcome that.
I would like to nominate Director Akbari as our future vice president of the board for the upcoming calendar year 2020.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second.
Directors Huang? Aye. Akbari?
Aye.
Sethy?
Aye.
Weed?
Aye.
And Gunther.
Aye. And I believe we'd like to take a brief recess at this moment.
We can just do item 5.2 really
We'll do
quickly.
5.2. Okay,
If that's okay.
that's fine. Item 5.2.
So item 5.2 is adoption of the 2020 calendar of regular board meetings and board workshops, so it's related to item 5.1. And section 7.2 of the Alameda County Water District Board Rules and Code of Conduct states that the regular board meetings are generally held on the second Thursday of each month at the hour of 6 p.m., with the exception of the April meeting, which will be held on the second Tuesday of each April. In addition, staff is planning to conduct several board workshops with the board, which will be held at 4 p.m. and are special board meetings pursuant to section 7.3 and 7.5 of the board rules. Regular and special board meetings are always open to the public. In order to provide advance notice to the public and to allow board members and staff to plan their annual schedules, staff is proposing the attached schedule, it's in your board packet, of regular board meetings and board workshops for board adoption. And of course, the district secretary has reached out to all of you to confirm that you are in fact available on those dates. It's difficult to reschedule things, so we really appreciate you taking an advance look. So the recommendation is by motion, adopt the proposed 2020 calendar of regular board meetings and board workshops of the Board of Directors.
Right.
We have a motion for the calendar.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
You have a question?
I'll put it on the table and then I'll make a...
Okay, I'll second.
Oh, you've been moved second. On May 21st, there is a BOSCA meeting that evening, which is the third Thursday of every other month. So, and that may also come into play, well, actually, it only comes in on that one day. There's a proposed, there's an alternate workshop date of the 28th. My request is that if we do have the workshop on the 21st, that we begin at 4 o'clock, and that we terminate it, recognize it may be necessary for me to leave at about 5:45 to be in San Mateo by 6:30. And if there's significant subject matter, we have a follow-on the following week. So I have no objection to the calendar as a whole, just alerting you to the potential conflict on the 21st of May.
I guess we can certainly monitor that as it moves along.
That's fine.
Okay.
Sure.
Other comments, questions? That, we have a motion, we have a second.
Excuse me, Directors Huang,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
and Gunther.
Aye. Board would like to take a brief, we adjourn 7 o'clock. Re-adjournment, 7 o'clock.
Director President Gunther, would you allow me to share a very quick story of history here?
All right.
That only happens on electing our new board members. So Director John Peel is one of, in my opinion, one of the best directors this district has ever had, but he only served 4 years on the board, from 1956 to 1960. He was the president of Pacific State Steel in Union City, which was the largest employer in the Tri-City area. And he was very concerned about the quality of water because the water was extremely hard and it was impacting steel production. And he couldn't compete without having a higher quality level of water. So he ran for the board and he was elected. And the evening of selection for president and vice president, the board tried multiple times to elect a board president, but they were divided 2-2. And Director Peel felt that it was not proper for him to vote for himself at that time, so he abstained on each board vote. After a certain point, he asked Director Patterson whether he could step down to the podium. This is at the old water district. He went to the podium, he laid out a 4-year agenda of what he planned to do as a director, which he had campaigned on, and asked permission for the board to vote him in as president of the board the night that he was sworn in. So the board members unanimously selected him as board president, and he served as board president for 4 full years and met all his commitments, got his company back in order, and then retired from the board. That's the story of Director John Peel. That picture was taken in the old boardroom, which was a stone wall. A little bit of history to share.
Every story has another edge to it. And it was during this time that the Water District purchased slag from the Pacific State Steel Mill for fill on our embankments and levees.
Okay.
On that note.
On that note.
Only a story you can share on the night you're electing officers.
And that slag had problems, and still does.
Moving on to item number 5.
You're right, John.
Okay, so 5.5 involves authorization to enter into agreement with the California State Water Resources Control Board for the Niles Cone Groundwater Basin Extraction Well Site Evaluation Project. And because this is a happy story involving state funds coming ACWD's way, we did not put it on the recommended for consent calendar. We like to provide some happy items every once in a while. And with that, Laura Highness will lead us through this item.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver. The district has preliminarily been awarded funding through the Proposition 1 Groundwater Grant Program for up to $613,048 from the California State Water Resources Control Board Division of Financial Assistance for the Niles Cone Groundwater Basin Extraction Well Site Evaluation Project. The project proposes the geologic and hydrogeologic evaluation of locations in the central portion of the basin where groundwater wells can potentially be sited to remove brackish water in the Centerville-Fremont aquifer. The State Board requires a resolution by the Board of Directors authorizing the General Manager to enter into a financial assistance agreement and taking other related actions. There are adequate funds in the fiscal year 2019-20 and fiscal year 2020-21 budgets to cover this expenditure. Board authorization of this grant agreement will help meet the district's strategic plan goal 2.1, maintain and enhance sustainability and reliability of local and regional water supplies. So staff is happy to recommend tonight by motion adopt a resolution authorizing the General Manager to enter into a financial assistance agreement with the California State Water Resources Control Board's Division of Financial Assistance in the amount up to $613,048 for implementation of the Niles Cone Groundwater Basin Extraction Well Site Evaluation Project and taking other related actions as required by the California State Water Resources Control Board. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
None.
Okay.
That's a comment. Thank you to staff. I think our staff did an incredible job, always applying for grants, and furthermore, I think credit goes to staff for always seeking to understand our groundwater basin and always trying to find ways to improve it. It's been a while since I worked for a regional water board, but ACWD has always had the reputation at the water board when I was there as the agency that truly seek to understand the groundwater basin and learn how to better manage it. So kudos to the staff for applying and receiving the grant, and hopefully we'll figure out what to do with this brackish water bulge in Centerville, Fremont.
Thank you. I will pass that on.
Once again, thank you to the groundwater stuff that this district does. I don't think it gets the public credit that it should. It's kind of done in the back room, and as much as we try to put it out there, nicely done.
Thanks.
And I will be very happy to make the motion to move staff recommendation.
Motion,
I'll second.
and second, Secretary call the roll.
Sure. Directors Huang,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
and Gunther.
Aye. Moving on to item number 5.6.
Yes, 5.6 involves the authorization of agreement for laboratory information management system. And, I don't need to remind the board how critical our laboratory function is, especially given the public's concerns with recent movies that have been released, like Dark Waters. You heard about it today. There's a book that was recently published called Troubled Water by an individual named Seth M. Siegel. If you haven't seen it, you might want to read it. And these books and movies kind of pertain to emerging contaminants. And so I'm sure the district's lab will continue playing an important role in protecting our water supplies. So with that, I turn this over to Manager of Operations and Maintenance, Kurt Arendt.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver. I'd just like to provide just a quick overview. Again, the lab is responsible for collecting and analyzing and reporting results for water quality sampling, both regulatory and operational. The Laboratory Information Management System, or LIMS as it's often called, is used to manage that program. It schedules the collection of samples, collects the data from the analysis, collects data from instruments, records this in a database, and then generates electronic reports that are submitted to the state, as well as provides alerts. So this system that is currently in place was implemented in 1993, is reaching the end of its life. So we'd like to upgrade and replace the system with a system that's specifically developed for water agencies. So it's used by several agencies in the area and will be implemented by staff. And we're looking to for recommendation to authorize the general manager to execute an agreement with Accelerated Technology Laboratories, Inc. for sample master limbs, an amount not to exceed $180,000, and be happy to answer any questions.
I have a question. I'm fully supportive of this agenda item, but I seem to recall that in the past we have outsourced some of our laboratory testing to a Southern California company. Are we still doing that, and will we continue to do that?
We occasionally use an outside lab, either if it's a workload issue or some tests that we don't have the specific instruments to do that analysis. We'll send it to an outside lab, yes, and that will continue.
Will this new equipment cover some of those things that we were trying to outsource?
Well, it'll collect the data. When we use an outside lab, they submit the data to us, which goes into this laboratory information management system. So it comes into our system and our database as part of our reporting, but in some cases we don't have the specific instruments needed for some specific lab analysis. That's kind of rare. We don't do it a lot, and some of these instruments can be very expensive to acquire and get certified for. So it's much more cost effective just to outsource those to an outside lab.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Just a quick question. The other software lasted us for 26 years. Do we expect this software to also last another 26 years?
I can't promise, but I would hope that it'll last quite a while. We're going to develop right now we use an outside consultant to help us administer the program, because it takes programming to kind of customize it for your needs. So this is more customer or user-friendly, I should say. So we'll have an in-house administrator that will not only help with the implementation of it, but also manage the system. So that should help in the long term, keeping the system up to date and meeting our needs. Yeah.
Further comments? Hearing none. Is there a motion for the item?
I'll make the motion.
Second.
A motion and a second for staff recommendation. Call the roll, please.
Sure. Excuse me. Directors Huang,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
and Gunther.
Aye. Moving on, item 5.7.
So 5.7 involves a resolution authorizing an extension to the appointment of retired annuitant to a limited-term critically needed position, and Ms. Highness, Manager of Water Resources, will cover this item.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver. The government code generally requires that a retired CalPERS annuitant be reinstated to active CalPERS membership upon employment by a CalPERS covered agency unless the appointment meets certain requirements of the government code. Accordingly, in December 2018, the board approved a resolution for the appointment of Stephen N., a retired annuitant, to a limited-term critically needed position to perform some specific, narrowly defined duties, and certified that the appointment meets the government code requirements which exempt a retired CalPERS annuitant from the reinstatement requirement to not be reinstated to active CalPERS membership. The board previously extended Mr. N's appointment to December 31st, 2019. Staff is requesting an additional time extension to Mr. N's appointment through June 30th, 2020 to provide support services due to his previous experience, knowledge, and responsibilities as the district's manager of water resources, associated with both the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, and representing the district's interest in the state water contractors related specifically to Delta conveyance. So tonight's recommendation from staff is by motion, adopt a resolution authorizing an extension to the appointment of retired annuitant Stephen N. to a limited-term critically needed position through June 30th, 2020. I'm happy to answer questions.
And in case it's not 100% clear in the discussion part of the staff report, a lot of this is related to the governor's decision to go with a one-tunnel alternative for Delta conveyance. So that basically shuffled the deck, and a lot of tasks that were already completed now need to be essentially redone. And it is important for Ms. Highness to be here in the office once in a while as opposed to being full-time in Sacramento. And this provides some redundancy and coverage for these critical, this is in my view, these critical state water contractors meetings that are going on every week for a couple of days a week lately. So it's really to help manage the workload, and Mr. Rin knows this stuff, so it really helps, and he's not really working that many hours.
He was made aware, and he was agreeable to extending a bit longer.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
I'll second.
For Directors Huang,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
and Gunther.
Last of the action items for you this evening, item 8 involves authorization of professional services agreement for customer information system integrations and modifications for the advanced metering infrastructure project, and this will be presented by our Manager of Engineering and Technology Services, Mr. Stevenson.
Thank you and good evening. It's been a little while since the board has seen an item related to AMI. The Advanced Metering Infrastructure Project will implement AMI technology throughout the district's service area, development of integrations between the district's existing Kayenta customer information system and the new AMI software, as well as modifications to the district's existing Kayenta CIS to support the deployment of the AMI system, are required in order to successfully implement the project. Integrations and modifications to the Kayenta CIS system will be completed in several phases. The initial project phase includes design, documentation, planning, and scheduling of the CIS integrations and modifications. There's adequate funding in the budget for this expenditure. The project and the need for this work were most recently reviewed with the full board at the May 30, 2019 board workshop and with the Engineering and Information Technology Committee on October 16, 2019. The project will help meet numerous district strategic plan goals, including 1.4, invest in system improvements to increase customer water use efficiency and engagement, and 5.2, enhance customer outreach and engagement with new tools. So staff's recommendation is by motion, authorize the general manager to execute a professional services agreement with Kayenta, a division of N. Harris Computer Corporation, an amount not to exceed $49,560 for professional services for customer information system integrations and modifications for the Advanced Metering Infrastructure Project, Job 10062. So this is work on our existing Kayenta CIS system, and it's the initial work that will be needed to ultimately integrate Kayenta with the AMI system that we have yet to select. So that's why staff is only proposing a small amount of this work at this point, so we can get into the Kayenta pipeline for their development work. Should the board proceed with approving staff's recommendation for an AMI system, which is currently scheduled for February, then the remainder of this work would be added by amendment after that time. I'd be happy to address any questions.
All right. Kayenta is the primary function of their role is the billing system for the district. So somewhat of a customer information system. Might that be a euphemism for the billing mechanism?
Well, this is where we store all of our customer information. Customer names, addresses, all the information about their services and so forth, and of course their consumption also.
Right. Along those lines, on the billing side, I would hope that if you're bringing them on board, that you will ask them to develop a mechanism by which we can bill a service charge on an independent mechanism such as a property tax bill, should that authorization come forward, without having to jump through yet another major analysis. Second, I've argued that it would be better to bill monthly in any case for all of our meters, including now, rather than waiting for AMI. That we decouple the meter reading from the billing with the ability to make estimates. It's currently not in the mindset. And my reservations on this item fundamentally go to my objections to or concerns about initiating an AMI process and program when we have such extraordinarily evolving technology in both telecommunications and also meters. Positive displacement meters are archaic and will soon be it's going from the analog to the digital world, and this will be yet another product in that transition to where the mechanical meter will not be they won't be made, and they'll be hard to replace. And this is a 20-year commitment for technology and something that's changing incredibly fast. So those are my thoughts. It'll probably be the result of my vote. Thank you.
I'll move staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Sure. Directors Huang,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
No.
and Gunther.
Moving on to reports, board committee reports. Comments, questions?
I have comments on two reports and under 6.1 and another under 6.2. I'll make it real quick. I just want to compliment our staff under, this is the LICA committee information. I was really impressed with the fact as to how our Facebook and Twitter followings have grown. The analytics showed that we had on Facebook 433 page views, post reach over 8,800, post engagement over 1,500, and video views of 4,700. I think that's pretty impressive for the service area that we have.
Yeah, a lot of that can be attributed to Renee Gonzalez. She's a new employee that we brought on board. Previously, she was at Ohlone College, and she's really amped up our social media presence with short, entertaining, informative little videos. If you're not on Facebook, you're missing out. That's all I can say. And Twitter.
Yeah, and on Twitter, over 36,000 tweet impressions, profile visits 568. So just, I'm very impressed because
Yeah.
I know what the numbers were.
I saw a video today. She had Mike Green on a video drinking water that's been infused with rosemary and cucumber or something, and it was awesome. I didn't know Mike could be so charming.
Second, Director Weed and I had asked earlier this fall for a new rates survey, even though we're not going through any rate hearings at this time until a year from now. So I asked that this information be shared with the board to show where we currently stand, and we're in the bottom third currently, projected to still be near the bottom third next spring. But as Mr. Wunderlich and his team, and I want to thank Sydney, who's sitting here in the audience, for preparing a lot of this information, that by the time rates are increased next summer for most districts, we will drop back down to where we are on the bottom red line. I was also at the BOSCA Board Policy Committee meeting yesterday, and there was a question asked by one of the directors as to how many of the attendees had rate increases that were going to be implemented by next summer. These are Hetch-Hetchy water users. There was a unanimous show of hands. So I think by the time next summer reaches around, we're going to be in the lowest tier of rates. So I just wanted to share that with the board and thank the finance team for producing that. The last thing I wanted to comment on was the water production report. You will note for the first time in all year, our water production exceeded our forecast. And also at the same BOSCA meeting yesterday, during their presentation of water usage by all the Hetch-Hetchy customers, every single customer showed an abnormal increase for the month of November, probably because the month was dry, but it was also noted that they're going to keep track of this because it may be the first signs of an uptick in water demand across our region. So that was interesting. I first saw it on our district, and then it was reinforced when I was at the BOSCA meeting. That's all I want to share.
No request for rain accumulation? Do we have that? Oh.
Okay. I have a couple of quick comments. First, on the Water Resources and Conservation Committee meeting, we had a report. There was a report in the minutes of a water loss audit, which said that ACWD reported 8.8% non-revenue water delivered. The question I have is that before or after the meters, it's been widely stated that the positive displacement meters that we use do not report 5 to 8% of the underreport our water usage by 5 to 8% for revenue, which would mean that we would, if that were part of it, would mean that we'd have almost no loss at all in our main system.
So, unless staff is familiar with the actual formula that's used, that could be something that we can get back to the board on.
I could tell you in general, the water loss audit does take into account, it's not specific to looking at customer meters, but it does take into account metering throughout our whole ins and outs process, and it takes into a lot of the account other billing type things. There's a pretty complex formula that they use, and it's done per AWWA standards and through a state process, and double-checked and triple-checked throughout, with all the numbers that we do. So it's pretty tight on the numbers. But
I think the question is it so tight that it takes into account, say, for example, what the demographics of your meter population are in age?
And that's a good question. It may, but I could double check and get back to you.
So if that's a question, then we could provide a response back to the full board.
Right. It's both in type, which is positive displacement, versus pulse technology, ultrasonic, which has much greater accuracy. And also the positive displacements do deteriorate over time with the age, where the pulse technology or the ultrasonic do not. So it would be just the mechanisms that they use, and is our actual revenue loss closer to 16% or 8.98%? What numbers do we actually have? And it's significant, and when you're looking at numbers of that size on $100 million in water sales a year.
Well, remember, it's not necessarily water sales, the difference. It's unaccounted for water. So it could be leaks, it could be water that's used for fire protection that isn't accounted for in some other way. It's just sort of a gross measure.
Right.
But we'll get back to you on your specific
Okay.
questions.
The second was the backside of the chart that Director Sethy was referencing on the revenues. I encourage you to look at the ratio of service charge to fixed charge to variable charges, and note that only San Jose Water Company, an enterprise district or company, has tried to match their fixed costs with their fixed revenues and variable costs with variable revenues. The others throughout the industry, going down probably in the worst case, Hayward, which is still better than we were when we started to make the transition of from less than 9% fixed to now a little over 30%. So, thank you.
Where are we on the rainfall report, by the way? Have we come up to average?
We have that information for you.
We do, so we are up to 3.51 inches to date, and we're pretty close, I believe, to, not quite to our average line, it's just a teeny bit below that. We are just right about, or a teeny bit above our driest year line. I'm happy that it started raining, and we're hopeful that it will continue, and we'll get closer to that average or above line. Fingers crossed.
Great.
I know I'd like to comment too. Looking at the Highness report, it continues to be a good report. Now, if I could only get my next door people in Union City to read this, I'm getting somewhere. But thank you so much for that effort. Just appreciate it. And then operational report, we covered that as well. Further comments on reports? Okay, moving on.
There are no GM reports.
No GM reports. Direct comments. I do have one request that we start the closed session by 8. We may have to cut this here at some point.
It's not a hard deadline. We do have somebody participating in one of the closed sessions that's available at 8. Yeah.
Press
So I'll go first, and I'll be short. I already covered 7.1. I presented on that last month, and I presented on it earlier this evening. If anybody wants a copy of the agenda, I have it right here with me. Again, it was one of the best CSDA one-day conferences I've ever attended. The second report is from the South Bay Engineers presentation. Their presentation was by one of the lead engineering consulting firms on what is called the 2-bar tunnel project over in it's cross-county, over near Tuolumne County and a neighboring county. It's called 2 Mile Bar historically, but it was a 1-mile tunneling project, and it was extremely challenging and difficult, and I really wanted to learn how they did that tunnel in case the subject ever came up as to how to convey water through the Vallecillos Channel that we've had discussions about. So it was a very interesting presentation. As I shared with another director, I asked multiple questions about how they met OSHA requirements and hazards and what the safety record was on this very challenging project, and I was firmly told the questions would not be answered. And that was the end of the meeting. Because
Okay.
I suspected that there was.
Something happened.
Right. And the question wasn't answered the first time when I asked it at the end of the meeting. The second time, I was told that's the end of the meeting. The third report I have is on the Water Education Foundation. It's called Project WET program. It's not here on the agenda, but it's the Project WET is the Water Education Foundation's program for water education for teachers. And I went up to Forestville very early in the morning. I think I left at 5 a.m. to drive up there to go through a Saturday full-day class with a group of teachers. I was the only non-teacher there. 2 of the instructors were from Sonoma County Water Agency. And I told the instructors I was there to observe the meeting, and they informed me that no, I was not there to observe. I would be a participant as a teacher for the day. And so, with a little trepidation early in the morning, I did join in and thoroughly enjoyed the learning experience that day. As we went on a couple of field trips too. It started very early, ended up late in the day. And we went to see two things that I've always been particularly interested in seeing, had not seen them yet. And these are the huge wells that Sonoma County Water Agency has on the Russian River. The biggest wells I've ever seen. That and they're settling ponds for percolating water down into the underground system there. So they're drafting water that percolates down from the Russian River right next to the banks of the river. And I think there were 6 major wells that we saw there. And then I got to see the recent construction of their new fish ladder, which was extremely impressive. It was completed 4 years ago. They do a lot of classroom tours of this fish ladder. It goes, you step underground and you can actually watch the fish go through the fish ladder, and it was really cool. And I was told that the kids who come on the field trips just absolutely love being able to see this visually. We were also shown some films because the beaver, there's a whole population of beaver around there that like to feast off the fish coming upstream. Remember, I've told the story about Alameda Creek. We used to have quite a beaver population here too when there was fish. But they showed video of beaver that actually were trying to capture a salmon, you know, big long salmon, and riding the back of these salmons, you know, as they were going upriver. The beavers would jump on their back and then actually riding on top of the salmon as they were being pulled forward. Had never seen that before. So the purpose of why I went up there was because I thought this might have, I wanted to see this more widely promoted in our schools in our area. And it not only is education on all areas of water, but it also helps to promote interest in all the job opportunities and educational opportunities that are available for careers. I talked to the program manager, Brian Brown, after I came back, and I was surprised and delighted to learn that the team of Ms. Gonzalez and Ms. Gonzalez were 2 steps ahead of me. And Renee had attended the training like I did 2 weeks earlier in Solano. And both Shireen and Renee have organized a teacher training for our Tri-City area for the public and private schools for September 26th, the Saturday next year. So I really learned a lot from going up there. It's tremendous, and I'm really looking forward to seeing this rolled out across our schools. That's it.
Okay. Let me see if follow the same pattern and cover each of them. The first is the Water Education Foundation Central Coast Tour, which went down, spent the night, left from Santa Clara Valley Water District early one morning, spent the night in Paso Robles, and then came back up to Monterey. You cannot describe the lack of common sense to some of the water policy coming out of Monterey County. They spent we visited a dam site where they spent $89 million to remove a dam built by the Del Monte Company about 100 years ago, which had silted up and retaining 50 acre-feet of water. Had it failed, there would have been almost no loss to the Carmel River. But the major issue was to generate fish, and they had a little over 100 additional fish that were making it past that dam site. About $1 million per fish. That is in the same order of magnitude of the money around Shasta, where we looked at the amount of money being spent for fish issues, and it was running, for every $1 million spent, you'll get one additional fish per year. In that case, salmon. As well as another here in the local runoff area. Next, also on that, the Marina Desalination facility, which is now deactivated. They built an entire desalination plant. For a while they were operating it on weekends with the argument that the power would be lower cost on weekends than during the week. The problem is they're required to put their wells at the coast where the salt water is near ocean concentration, but they're right adjacent to a brackish groundwater water basin, but they're not allowed to take water out of that water basin, which would make economic sense. Next, the voters are trying to take over the American Waters facilities. Monterey Peninsula is the wholesaler, have a private investor-owned retailer, and they want to take it by eminent domain so they can stop any water development at all if they can get political control. It's just the ultimate in no-growth mindsets. It's and some economically bizarre policy making. Next, see, we had the Aqua conference, where one of the sessions struck me as remarkable, and that was the energy. They showed the graphs showing, due to the efforts of the state to promote solar, and it may impact our own program that we're looking at with investor-owned solar. There's an extraordinary surplus of power during daylight hours, and that surplus is going to grow dramatically in the near future as more and more solar comes online. The cost of power is negative. There's no place to put it. There was a pump and release project proposed that had been reinvented from San Diego, where in the old days you'd pump at night and release during the day to take care of the power cost. Their proposal is they'll pump during the day when power is essentially free and release it at night when there's still some essential value to power. The entire system is turned on its head. My concern is that the board has authorized a review with private party investments into a field where the economics has been truly turned on its head and no longer makes sense. Maybe there are regulatory requirements and tax incentives that one can justify it, but for how long? Because any of these programs have to assume some stability in the system over a period of time, and right now the fundamental economics are not there.
Well, I will keep my comments pretty short. I was also at the Aqua conference. I will start by saying that I thought our general manager, Bob Shaver, gave a great presentation on how to survive a 218 meeting. Very informative, and also kept it very funny. I'll just highlight one session that I did make it to, and it was about migrating services to the cloud. And one of the panel speakers was from East Bay Mud, and he was sharing with us the considerations that they made when choosing a cloud provider. They ended up going with a hybrid cloud solution, and so I did get his card, and I'm going to pass that along to staff. I think it would be great just to at least pick his brain and understand the considerations that they made when migrating to the cloud. And then the second thing I'll just briefly touch upon is one of the vendors, XIO Inc., based here in San Rafael. I had a chance to talk to them with President Gunther and with Mr. Arendz, and their the company is helping agencies move SCADA to the cloud, which I have always been highly skeptical of. But they gave a pretty interesting pitch on the security that they've built around it. It's not something that I'm advocating for at this time, but it's just something to keep in our back pocket as another option out there when we're upgrading our SCADA systems. And so I did get a card from them, and I'll pass it along as well. And not that I'm saying we should necessarily engage with them at this point, but just to keep in mind that it's a unique option, certainly. And I'll end there.
And, I'll pick right up on the XIO company. After the election, I did go to the election for the Aqua Vice President and President, and very interesting enough, the floor nomination of
Pam Tobin.
Pam Tobin, she defeated Sarah Plummer 50 to 69, which was kind of interesting. Now, this was not a nomination made there. They were both in the Aqua, the pamphlet is running, so I mean, it wasn't exactly a direct floor nomination, but nonetheless, it occurred. So after that extended period there, I went over to a little bit in shock, went over to the vendors and also discussed with the XIO guys. And I warned them that I was going to send Director Akbari over there, and they better not try to snowball him. Once again, interesting. I admit, I am not, the cyber security guru. Pretty good with SCADA. That's why I sent Aziz over there. And they seem to have an interesting product. Would not surprise me. I think it's worth, they're right here in the Bay Area, which is kind of convenient as well. Went to a couple of sessions. I did go to the session where our general manager was up front and right out there, and it was very entertaining on the Prop 218. Interesting to hear how some other people had their feelings. One, they wrote, I guess they transcribed every comment or something. I mean, that would be, we would have had, the book this big. But I think we showed well for what we do here, how we do it, and, well, what can happen when you do that. But it was entertaining, and I think a lot of people hopefully learned something from what we've done. And I'm proud of what we've done. It's painful, but nonetheless, I think it was the right thing to do. Particularly going online, it has its pitfalls and our lessons learned. And while as painful as it was, I do believe it still was the right thing. And I think that came out in the 218 meeting. I went to the Federal Affairs session. The NRDC, I believe they're taking their next approach. They're actually suing. It looked like we were making progress towards trying to do things with science, and we've got some new stuff I noticed with the Delta smelt. They're actually trying to track them in turbid water. They said about the last 10 years this has been going on. So I don't want to say about time, but if we're going to be tying ourselves to our water supply to a species like the Delta smelt, which seems to draw a lot of attention, I understand it, I get it, it's important, but let's have good science. If we're going to say there aren't any Delta smelt, but they're hiding over here in a cloud of turbid water, then we're not having good science. So there seems to be some movement. I'm not so certain. I appreciate what the NRDC did, but I've never been a believer for leaving lawsuits to begin with. If you could avoid them. But that seems to be the pattern of today. So, with that,
President Gunther, I have one comment about Aqua, if I may, if you're done.
I think I'm done. I'll end it there.
Okay, so even though I did not attend Aqua, I am on the local government committee, and I had brought up the subject in our spring Aqua conference about the subject of putting the service charge on from our water bills on the property tax bill, and it drew a lot of interest, and we had a fairly lengthy discussion about it at the spring Aqua. So I put together a written proposal for the committee to review for this current Aqua session, and apparently it was well considered and debated upon, and it has now been referred to the legislative committee, which will review it, and I also asked at some point that it go to the legal affairs committee. So it did move forward, and Director Akbari, you attended the meeting?
I did.
And do you know what the vote was?
They didn't take a formal vote on it.
Because I heard it was fairly unanimous to move it forward.
Right. They didn't take a formal vote. They asked for
Okay.
objections, and there were no objections.
Okay, so that concurs with what I heard from the legislative analyst that was there. So I'm happy that it moved forward, and that it's gaining some steam and real interest from districts around the state. I did provide them with a list of districts that have already implemented this, and I also provided them with the name of an attorney that Director Weed and I met at a conference, who is the specialist on Prop 218 issues for the law firm of Best and Krieger down in San Diego. So they've got a lot of background information from me right now to help move forward on this. That's it.
I was reminded I would be remiss that I don't want us to think we're having secret meetings, but we did have a meeting with the South Bay Aqueduct contractors, myself, Director Akbari, and Mr. Schaefer. Successful. Zone 7 was there. Valley Water was there. Actually, DWR came and spoke to the group, and I think they got the message that we are concerned. Certainly the message about the leak, like 2 weeks ago, which was, I don't know if you want to use the word good timing regarding them, not good timing for them, but I'm trying to remember who actually came. Bob, do you remember it was...
Oh, goodness. I was Assistant Deputy Director of DWR.
And the engineering?
And one of their engineers assigned to the South Bay Aqueduct. So they heard from the directors of all three agencies that were present the concerns raised about, South Bay Aqueduct, that a letter was sent to them about a year and a half ago that I co-signed, and we didn't receive a response until the day before the meeting. What I think the consensus is that they're doing a lot to get their arms around the South Bay Aqueduct, and that it's reliable and its reliability, but there are limitations on resources. They're looking at asset management issues for the whole system. So the three South Bay Aqueduct contractors suggested that, you have available in-kind services potentially to help you with this. I mean, we pay anyway, and the South Bay Aqueduct could be a poster child for DWR in terms of, getting their arms around properly managing the asset. And, obviously Valley Water has the most at risk. During that leak that recently occurred, they were totally reliant on SFPUC supply because their other connection to the State Water Project was also unavailable to them. So they get pretty excited. And So DWR committed to provide a detailed schedule of everything that they're going to do at a meeting in January, and I think, I think they did a pretty good job at conveying, hey, we've been doing a lot, but we really haven't been communicating to you guys enough about what we're doing, so we can see why you're anxious, and we'll do a better job at that, and we'll commit to a schedule and go from there. And, obviously ACWD has an interest, even though it's downstream of our takeoffs, because big leaks in the South Bay Aqueduct wipe out our community. So it's an important issue. And Valley Water's reliability is also an interest of ours, too.
So I have no further comments, and I know we have a closed session. There's actually two of them. One is conference. Well, the first one is conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation, one potential case. And the second one, pursuant to California Government Code Section 549568, conference with real party negotiators, property, the N3 Ranch, consisting of 131 parcels and approximately 550,555 acres, Alameda County, Santa Clara County, San Joaquin County, Stanislaus. Agency negotiators, Robert Schaefer. Anything else I need to report on?
Negotiating parties?
Oh, negotiating parties would be the N3 Cattle Ranch, LLC, Wren Jr. and Wren Jr. TR. Under negotiation, price and terms of payment.
We're convening into closed session at 8:02.
Altera. Okay, at 10:36, call the meeting back into order.
Great, and I will give the report on the open session report on the closed sessions. On item 8.1, pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.9 subsection D4, the board met in closed session to confer with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation, one potential case, and in that closed session, no action was taken. For the second closed session, item 8.2, pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.8, conference with real property negotiators, the property N3 Cattle Company, consisting of 131 parcels and approximately 50,535 acres in Alameda County, Santa Clara County, San Joaquin County, and Stanislaus County. Assessor parcel numbers were furnished by the owner's representative and are attached to the agenda. The agency negotiators, Robert Shaver and Ed Stevenson. Negotiating parties, N3 Cattle Company, LLC, Wren Jr. and Wren Jr. Trust. Under negotiation, price and terms of payment. And in that closed session, direction was given to the agency negotiators. And that concludes the open session report.
And with that, I will pass the hammer to, excuse me, the gavel.
Doesn't look good.
To the next
We have a zero
president.
tolerance policy for workplace in the
Like this?
island.
No, she's passed, if she has accepted.
Yeah.
And you may declare the meeting.
And I will